I'm now 7 years out from completing my master's degree in city planning. I should actually be a little bit more specific. It's been 7 years since I completed the coursework portion of my master's degree. The thesis took a little bit longer to finish, but that's not really the point here. I'm not about to make a video putting myself on trial. The point here is that I'm now far enough into my career as a planner that I can safely say that the PTSD from going through the long Winnipeg winters for that degree has subsided enough that I'm in a place where I can finally reflect on my time there, specifically about how my planning education barely prepared me for my career as a planner to date. I've been fortunate enough to work in both public and private sectors across the Canadian prairies, so I feel like I have enough data for a complete sample size. With the new academic year looming, I thought it was a good time to discuss a few things that I've come across over my career that I wish I had learned in planning school. Richard, if you're watching, I'm sorry, and listen up. So the first thing is that planners don't actually make any decisions. I got you with that clickbait, didn't I? And it kind of is clickbait, but the reality is that planners make recommendations. Final decisions are always made by councils. All the policy and bylaws that planners spend hours researching, writing, and winning awards for have to get approved by council before they can be regulated by those same planners. It puts planners in a weird spot. It's kind of like movie writers going to a network executive to sell their concept for a movie. They're really just asking for permission to work on their movie, and of course some funding. That weird spot is there because, like movie writers, the sales pitch has to be compelling, so the finished product may not be exactly as the planners had intended at the start, because it's modified to include the priorities of the council so that it gets approved. Coming out of school, I knew that councils regulated certain aspects of planners' roles. What I didn't know is that they regulated all aspects of the day-to-day functions as well. So when working in the public sector, council approves the salaries of the planners as well as the work environments. In order to even start working on a planning document, council has to authorize it. And of course, the final products are approved by council. So they're really the judge, jury, and executioner of the planning process. In the private sector, it's the developers that control everything a planner does. It was pretty startling finding out how much effect councils and developers actually had on the planning process. The second thing I wish I learned is that there's way more to planning than just planning. The thing I like the most about planning is the conceptual design, so looking at an existing situation and rethinking it to spur redevelopment really tickles me. The process is the coming together of research, visioning, and design to put forward the best plan possible. At least that's what I was taught in my planning education, where our studio projects involved breaking into teams and executing plans. It's very similar to how the actual process of plan development happens. The difference, of course, is that in school, the plans were researched, visioned, and designed solely by planners, and in reality, there's much more involvement from other disciplines like scientists, market analysts, engineers, architects, landscape architects, just to name a few. So in school, we were executing these plans in a vacuum, or a planning echo chamber if you want, resulting in wildly idealistic plans that were based on planning principles alone. In practice, I was alarmed to find out that planning visions carry at best as much weight as these other disciplines during the planning processes. So things like engineering and environmental standards, market analyses, and the financial impacts of planning decisions always came second to planning visions while I was in school. In practice, though, it's the opposite. Planning principles kind of take a back seat to these other elements. So let's go through an example to illustrate this difference. The Northland site in Edmonton is the former home of my beloved Edmonton Oilers before they moved to their new spaceship-looking arena in downtown Edmonton. It's a fantastic redevelopment opportunity for the city with nearly 65 hectares of land up for redevelopment in the study area. As a planning student, I'd have first looked at the site through a Kevin Lynch lens, so identifying the nodes, paths, districts, edges, and landmarks like any good planning student would do. I'd have also researched the neighborhood through demographic lenses as well as a few site visits, so using all that information, I'd have gotten right to work designing a new plan. First, the existing LRT stop and bus station would be moved south and located at grade for easier rider access to and from the site, and surrounded by mixed-use transit-oriented development. Wayne Gretzky Drive would be decoupled, new access routes would be punched through the site, the existing arena would be repurposed as a community rec center and surrounded by a large community park. The existing expo center would be retained and surrounded by a cultural festival ground for year-round exhibitions. A non-vehicular corridor dedicated to pedestrians and cyclists would connect the baseball diamonds north of Wayne Gretzky Drive, the park and cultural areas, and Borden Park to the south. Sprinkle in some higher density residential around the park areas, some lower density residential around the periphery, some commercial and tech uses along the major roadways, and boom, I'd put some presentation boards together, wear a suit, present this thing to my classmates and professors, get a solid B plus and some feedback I'd never have to worry about because the semester's over. I'd go get a summer job, accidentally delete the digital files at the start of the new semester, and forget all about the plan until I needed to impress a girl at a bar. All in a very busy but manageable 8 weeks. In reality, though, the process is way more complex. I'd still go through the Lynch mapping exercise and land at the same place, but while doing that, there would be a slew of other studies being done by people way smarter than me. So things like environmental analyses, engineering studies, financial impacts, transportation assessments, just to name a few. This research phase alone would last longer than my entire project took as a student and would determine that traffic would be too congested if the transit stop and Wayne Gretzky Drive were realigned the way I had proposed. Maybe I'd be allowed to have the north-south pedestrian and cyclist corridor, but building assessments would reveal that renovating the existing arena is way too costly, and there doesn't need to be that big of a park on the north side either, with Borden Park in the south. The cultural lands would be shrunk because the lands are way too valuable and the city can make way more money off of it by selling it to developers. The internal roadways would be realigned because of contemporary engineering standards. Then the public would come in and have their say, identifying that the density is far too high and that there should be more single-family houses because that's what they prefer. And after nearly 2 years of sitting at a table being patted on the head by everyone telling me that they love my idealism, but I need to be more realistic, I'd burn out, wrap up the plan in a way that makes the most people happy, get it approved by council, humble brag about it on my LinkedIn profile, and use it to impress people over a craft beer at planning conferences, move on to a new project, and forget all about the plan, all in a long and tumultuous 3 years. Maybe I was a little naive coming out of planning school, but the length and complexity of completing a plan of that magnitude, not to mention how much of it is dictated by council, developers, and other disciplines, was not something that I was prepared for. And honestly, it frustrated me being a planner and being of such low importance in the planning process other than being a middleman between all these other more important elements. Had I been exposed to these other disciplines more often during school and their importance to the planning process, I would have cried far less in the shower during my first few years as a professional planner. I should say that I am super grateful for the planning education that I did get. It taught me to think big picture, think critically, and convince people that I knew what I was doing. But it did not completely prepare me for the realities of being a planner and leading a planning process of that magnitude under intense scrutiny from council, the public, and other disciplines. But, as my dad would say, maybe nothing except my education at the School of Hard Knocks could have. This has been Ryan with Eins Consulting. Thanks for watching.
Take me to your leader. I'm a alien. I just see the stars where we are.